Hi Valentina, thanks for being here with us today. And the topic for today is iron. So what is it and why should we integrate it in our diet?
Hello Jana, nice to speak with you and to be here with you today. We have a really interesting topic, iron. Iron, which is an essential mineral, really fundamental for our growing and developing. In our body, we have approximately 3-4 grams of iron, and 65% of this can be found in hemoglobin and 10% in myoglobin. The rest of the iron that we have in our body is actually mainly dedicated as a function of deposit or as an enzyme. Normally, following a balanced diet, we can compensate the physiological elimination of iron. But what can happen is that this balance is broken and we have cases of deficit or excess of iron.
And in which food can we find iron?
Food rich in iron are mainly offals, meat, white and red, fish, mollusk, egg yolk, but also legumes and all the derivatives from legumes, as well as, for example, dry nuts. What we need to consider is that iron contained in animal origin product is easily absorbed by our body, while the iron contained in vegetable product is absorbed in a slower process. And this is due to the different chemical molecules of the two types of iron. In plant-based product, there might be substances which are reducing the absorption of iron. For example, phosphate, oxalate, phytate. While in other products, like for example kiwi, oranges, there is vitamin C, which is actually accelerating and supporting the absorption.
And how much shall we consume daily?
The daily intake of iron depends pretty much on our age, gender, and particularly for women, if we are in a status of pregnancy, lactation, or postmenopausal phase. In this table that you see, I only refer to the population reference intake provided by EFSA, the European Food Safety Agency. But of course, there are many other recommendations depending on the country where you are. You can see in this table different population group divided also based on the age. The average amount of iron which is needed, and also the reference intake based on the specific population. And as you can see, infants, children, premenopausal women, pregnant women and lactating women, they need a higher amount of iron.
Is iron supplementation always needed?
Iron supplementation is actually needed when there is a clear deficit of iron. And this deficit might be caused by different situations, like for example, a restricted diet, diet rich in fibers or rich in oxalate, phosphate, and all these substances which are reducing the absorption of iron, or in case of specific disease where iron is automatically absorbed in a lower quantity and eliminated even more. As well as when we have physiological bleeding or any other reason of excessive bleeding. Condition for women for example, in pregnancy or lactation, where the iron intake should be higher. Or even, for example, during endurance sport like running, where there are some conditions after long distance running where we have a higher elimination of iron. How we can identify that we are in deficit of iron? By, of course, doing a simple analysis of our blood. Are there any symptoms that might give us a signal that we are in deficit of iron? Of course there are. For example, if we feel permanently weak, or if our skin tends to be pale, if we are in a situation where we feel fatigue in doing simple exercise or in doing the daily needed activities.
Can the excess of physical activity or extremely restricting diets cause a lack of iron?
Yes, indeed. As we said, physical activity might lead to loss of iron. Particularly when we look at the endurance sport, like for example, marathonists running really long distances. In those cases, we have modest elimination of iron due to gastrointestinal bleeding. It can be around 0.7 and 0.9 milligram, so it's quite modest, but still on top of the, let's say, physiological elimination due to urines, which is usually low in sedentary people but is increasing in athletes. Altogether it makes, let's say, a certain elimination. On top, if you are a woman, an athlete woman, you have to consider that during your menstruation period you will lose approximately between 30 and 60 milliliter of blood, which is equal to 30 milligrams of iron.
And what are the health consequences of not getting enough iron in a diet?
If we prolong the deficit of iron for a longer time, we risk to fall into anemia. And this is the case where you have lower blood cells in your vessels and therefore lower distribution of oxygens in your organism. And this is leading then to having the symptoms we mentioned before almost on a permanent base.
Can vegan people cover the recommended daily intake of iron? And how does almond milk support the iron absorption?
Yes, absolutely, but with a little bit more attention. For example, vegan people can, by preparing their food, pay attention to keep the cereal soaking in water for a certain period of time, also legumes. This will enable to increase the absorption of iron, as well as combine food with, for example, with some source of vitamin C, like peppers, lemon, kiwi, or oranges. And then, of course, to avoid to combine food containing maybe a lot of iron with food which is known to, let's say, limiting the absorption of iron. For example, tea, coffee, or food rich in fibers. That are, let's say, the substances that we mentioned before, blocking somehow the absorption of iron. And of course, to, let's say, to monitor constantly the blood is also one tip I would give in order to make sure that we are having a proper amount of iron in our body for the proper functionality of our organism. And milk drinks are actually a good source of iron. If we take, for example, the Choco After drink, which is, by the way, my favorite, it has 5.6 milligram of iron. And this is already, for example, 35% of the daily intake of a minimum 18 years old woman in premenopausal stage.
Thanks for your time and your detailed information about iron. That was again very helpful and informative.
Thanks to you, Jana. It's always a pleasure. And of course, as usual, I will be available to answer questions and not only related to this topic, but eventually to previous topic we exchange and we discuss. And looking forward to see you next time. Bye bye.